Welcome back. Let's continue here now. Kenyans can now travel visa-free to South Africa. The new dispensation starting from next year has been announced by President Cyril Ramaphosa and his Kenyan counterpart, President William Ruto. Ruto is hosting Ramaphosa, who is on a state visit to Kenya. The two leaders have also focused on strengthening economic, political and social cooperation. Kaeli Kumalo has more for us.
After years of intense negotiations, Kenyans can come to South Africa without a visa. President Cyril Ramaphosa and his Kenyan counterpart, President William Ruto, say this marks a new chapter and it will also stimulate tourism.
With a view of allowing Kenyans to be able to visit South Africa on a free visa basis, that is without having visas, we agreed that indeed Kenyans should be able to visit South Africa without requiring them to have visas, and that this dispensation will commence on the 1st of January in 2023.
Kenyans holding ordinary passports will be allowed to enter South Africa on a visa-free regime for up to 90 days per calendar year.
Both leaders have also called for the guns to be silenced in the DRC, Ethiopia and the Sahel region.
During our discussions, focus on several issues affecting our beloved continent, including the situation in the Democratic Republic of Congo, Ethiopia, as well as Western Sahara. We agree on the need for peace and stability in our continent and the ending of conflicts within and between states.
These conflicts cause suffering, disorder, and lead to unsafe migration and weakening of states. Your Excellency, I want to thank you specifically for providing the necessary leadership that saw the resolution, at least at the technical level, and now that implementation will be carried out on the matters between Tigray and the government of Ethiopia.
The two leaders have just returned from the climate change talks in Egypt, Sharm el-Sheikh, and they say the world is facing an existential crisis.
We have fossil fuel based energy generators, and some of them have been generating electricity for years. One of those has just been retired, and it was not retired because we just wanted to do it. It had reached the end of its life, as it often happens with fossil fuel generated power stations. They reach the end of their lives, and it's our decision whether we want to be ahead of the curve or not and embark on new and renewable green energy sources.
It is our belief that it is always the time to do the right thing. It is also our belief that two wrongs never add up to a right. So while we know the wrongs of the past, we can right them by doing the right thing now going into the future. And that is why South Africa is talking about just transition.
South Africa and Kenya have recommitted to ensuring that the Kiswahili language is taught in South Africa. Kaeli Kumalo, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Right now, let's discuss this. We're now joined via Zoom by Dr. Westen Shilaho, a research specialist in African diplomacy and foreign policy at the University of Johannesburg. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Let's start with the visa. Now, South Africa and Kenya have, of course, assigned a new visa regime. What do you think these leaders, both need to do to ensure that this system is not abused? Because we know that this has been an ongoing debate between the two countries.
Thank you, Nati. They also talked about return policy, which referred to those who breach the immigration laws between the two countries, what to do with them. It means they have to be collected, as it were, and be returned to the host country. So it will be the implementation part of it. And I don't think it's likely to be prone to abuse, because 90 days for ordinary passport holders in Kenya, that's quite a number of days. And therefore, people will have less incentive to abuse this diplomatic agreement, according to my view. So I think both parties will get into the nuts and bolts of this agreement and see to it that it's implemented fully and it's not prone to abuse.
Now, let's move on to this now. You know, President Cyril Ramaphosa last year saying that he wants to see a greater balance of trade between South Africa and Kenya, you know, as the two countries pledged to foster improved economic relations. You know, we know that back then there was an uneven trade between the two countries, and just on this recent visit, you know, the two leaders have directed their trade ministers to address the barriers that limit trade between the two countries. What improvements are we likely to see?
Well, non-tariff barriers particularly, and I think the Kenyan party has complained for the longest time about inability to penetrate the South African market. They lay, blame to non-tariff barriers by the South African government that make it hard for some of the Kenyan goods to find their way into the South African market. So I think the discussion was around there, so that there is evening of this trade between the two countries that is heavily tilted in favor of South Africa, which Kenyans attribute to that, the non-tariff barriers that hinder the Kenyan goods from finding their way into the South African market.
Dr. Shilaho, thank you so much for your time and your analysis. Really do appreciate it. Dr. Westen Shilaho, Research Specialist in African Diplomacy and Foreign Policy at the University of Johannesburg.